The champagne flutes trembled in my hands as I watched my daughter Miranda adjust her veil one final time. The morning light streaming through the bridal suite windows caught the pearls sewn into her dress, the same pearls I'd worn on my own wedding day 32 years ago. She looked radiant, though her jaw was set in that familiar line of determination that meant she was about to say something I wouldn't like. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Mom, she said without turning around, her voice carrying that careful tone she'd perfected in her MBA program, about the reception tonight. David and I have been talking, and we think it would be better if you kept a low profile during the toasts. I set the champagne flutes down on the marble vanity, each clink echoing in the sudden silence. Through the mirror I could see Miranda's maid of honor, Jessica, shifting uncomfortably near the door. She'd known me since the girls were in elementary school, had spent countless afternoons at my kitchen table working on school projects and eating my homemade cookies. A low profile, I repeated, keeping my voice steady. At my daughter's wedding. Miranda finally turned around, her wedding dress rustling like autumn leaves. At 28, she'd inherited her father's sharp features and his talent for making difficult conversations sound reasonable. You know what I mean. No stories about the old neighborhood, no mentioning where we used to live, nothing about your job at the factory. David's family is very traditional, very proper. His father is a federal judge, his mother sits on 3 charity boards. They have certain expectations. The expectations. I've been hearing about David's family's expectations for the past 18 months, ever since Miranda had brought him home for Christmas dinner. David Ashworth III, heir to a banking fortune, graduate of Princeton and Harvard Business School, a man who'd never worked a day in a factory or worried about making rent, a man whose idea of struggle was choosing between the family house in the Hamptons or the ski lodge in Aspen for vacation. I understand, I said, though understanding and agreeing were 2 very different things. I smoothed the skirt of my navy blue dress, the one I'd bought at Nordstrom Rack after saving for 3 months. It was elegant enough for a wedding, simple enough not to draw attention, which seemed to be exactly what Miranda wanted. Through the window I could see guests arriving at the country club, their luxury cars winding up the circular drive. The Meadowbrook Country Club was exactly the kind of place Miranda had dreamed about since she was little. All manicured lawns and crystal chandeliers and servers who called everyone sir and madam. It was also exactly the kind of place that would have laughed if someone like me had tried to book it 20 years ago. Miranda turned back to the mirror, fussing with her hair. I just want everything to be perfect, you know? David's been under so much pressure at the firm, and his parents have been so generous with the wedding expenses. I don't want anything to seem out of place. Out of place? Like me. Jessica cleared her throat softly. Miranda, maybe we should focus on getting you ready. The photographer will be here soon for the family pictures. Family pictures. I wondered if those would require me to keep a low profile too, or if I'd be strategically positioned in the back where my factory worker hands and discount store dress wouldn't show too clearly. Miranda's phone buzzed on the vanity. She glanced at it and smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her all morning. David's getting nervous. He says his best man is trying to calm him down with shots of his father's vintage whiskey. I picked up one of the champagne flutes and took a small sip, letting the bubbles settle on my tongue. Nervous grooms are a good sign. Shows he knows he's getting something precious. For just a moment, Miranda's expression softened. Do you really think so? I know so. Your father was so nervous on our wedding day, he forgot his own middle name when the minister asked for it. The mention of Robert made Miranda's smile flicker. Her father had been gone for 8 years now, taken by cancer, just as she was starting college. He'd never seen her graduate, never walked her down the aisle, never met the man who was about to become his son-in-law. If Robert were here, he'd be telling David stories about Miranda as a little girl, probably embarrassing her in exactly the way she was now trying to prevent me from doing. Mom, Miranda said, her voice gentler now, I know this is hard. I know you wish Dad were here. I wish that too. But today needs to be about moving forward, about David and me building something new together. His family represents opportunities, connections that could really help our future. Opportunities and connections. I thought about the opportunities I'd had at her age. working double shifts at the textile factory to pay for her dance lessons and summer camps. I thought about the connections I'd made with other single mothers, all of us pooling resources and watching each other's children so we could work and survive and give our kids chances we'd never had. I understand, I said again, because what else was there to say? Jessica's phone chimed. The photographer's here. Should I tell him to start with the bridesmaids? Yes, and then we'll do individual shots of Miranda before the family pictures. Jessica moved toward the door, then paused. Mrs. Coleman, you look beautiful today. That shade of blue is perfect on you. After Jessica left, the bridal suite felt smaller, more intimate. Miranda sat heavily in the chair by the window, suddenly looking younger than her 28 years. The weight of the wedding dress seemed to pull her shoulders down. Mom, you understand why this is important, don't you? David's world is different from what we're used to. There are rules, expectations, the way people talk, the stories they tell, the connections they make. Everything matters. I sat on the small sofa across from her, smoothing my skirt again. What kind of stories do you think I'd tell? You know what I mean. About growing up in the projects? About Dad's drinking problem? About you working nights at the factory? About how we used to shop at thrift stores and clip coupons for everything? David's family doesn't need to know all of that. The projects. Miranda made it sound like we'd lived in some urban wasteland, instead of a subsidized housing complex where neighbors looked out for each other and children played safely in shared courtyards. She made my job at Peterson Textiles sound like something shameful instead of honest work that had paid for her private school tuition and college application fees. And your father's drinking? I asked quietly. Miranda's cheeks flushed. That was a long time ago. He got sober, he stayed sober until he died. But David's family doesn't need to know about the meetings, about the nights when you had to pick him up from bars. They don't need to know about any of that struggle. The struggle. As if the struggle had been something separate from us, something we'd observed rather than lived through. As if the nights I'd stayed up helping her with homework after 12-hour shifts had been someone else's story. As if the pride on her father's face when she graduated valedictorian had been tainted by the path we'd traveled to get there. Through the window I could see more guests arriving. Women in designer dresses stepped carefully across the gravel in expensive heels. Men in perfectly tailored suits checked gold watches and straightened silk ties. David's world. Where appearances mattered more than substance. Where the right story was more important than the true one. A knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. Come in, Miranda called, and Jessica reappeared with the photographer. A young man with an expensive camera and the kind of confident smile that suggested he was used to photographing important people at important events. Ladies, are we ready to capture some memories? He surveyed.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
The room with a professional eye. I'm thinking we start with the bride alone, then bring in the mother for some intimate shots before we gather the full wedding party. Intimate shots. I wondered how intimate they'd be if I was supposed to keep a low profile. Miranda stood, her dress falling perfectly around her like something from a fairy tale. Actually, let's do the bridesmaids first. I want to make sure the light is right before we do the family pictures. The photographer nodded and began adjusting his equipment. Miranda moved to the full-length mirror, checking her appearance one more time. In the reflection I could see her watching me, her expression unreadable. Mom, she said softly, I need you to promise me something. I waited, though I could guess what was coming. Promise me you'll be careful tonight. During the toasts, during dinner conversation, just be careful about what you share, please. Be careful, don't embarrass us. Don't let them see where we came from. Don't remind anyone that fairy tales sometimes start in places that aren't so pretty. I stood and walked to where she was standing, placing my hands on her shoulders. In the mirror, we looked like what we were. Mother and daughter, two women who'd traveled a long road together, who'd survived loss and struggle and come out stronger. But I could also see what Miranda saw. Two women from different worlds. One in a designer wedding dress, and one in a department store special, one with manicured nails, and one with hands that showed the wear of real work. "I promise," I said, and meant it, not because I was ashamed of our story, but because I loved her enough to let her write her own. The photographer finished setting up and gestured for Miranda to take her place by the window. "Beautiful," he murmured, clicking away. "Natural, elegant, perfect. Perfect." I watched my daughter pose for pictures that would commemorate this day, this moment when she officially joined a world that had no place for the woman who'd raised her. The irony wasn't lost on me that the very qualities they'd be celebrating tonight, her intelligence, her determination, her grace under pressure, were qualities she'd learned in the world she was now so eager to leave behind. But that was the thing about mothers and daughters. We teach them to fly, even when we know they might fly away from us. The morning continued with the choreographed precision of a Broadway show. Bridesmaids arrived in matching pink dresses, each of them perfectly coiffed and carrying small designer handbags. They kissed Miranda's cheeks and complimented her dress, and took selfies that would undoubtedly appear on social media within minutes. These were her sorority sisters, her business school friends, women who'd never known the Miranda who used to help me fold laundry for extra money, or who'd worked weekends at the mall to save for her first car. "Elena, you remember my mother," Miranda said when the bridesmaids had settled in with their own champagne flutes. Elena, the maid of honor, gave me a polite smile. "Of course." "How lovely to see you again, Mrs. Coleman. You must be so proud." I was proud, prouder than I had words to express. But there was something in Elena's tone that suggested pride should be my primary emotion today, not participation. Pride was quiet, observational, suitable for someone who'd served her purpose, and was now meant to step gracefully aside. The photographer worked his way through the wedding party, capturing posed shots and candid moments. When he finally turned his attention to family pictures, Miranda's posture changed subtly. She became more formal, more careful with her smiles. "Let's do some shots of the bride with her mother," the photographer suggested, directing us to stand near the window where the light was best. Miranda slipped her arm through mine, but her touch was light, almost cautious. We smiled for the camera while the photographer clicked away, and I found myself wondering if these pictures would end up in the wedding album, or if they'd be quietly edited out in favor of shots that better fit the narrative Miranda was trying to create. "Beautiful relationship," the photographer murmured. "You can see the family resemblance." We did look alike, Miranda and I. The same dark hair, though hers was professionally styled, and mine was cut at a salon in my old neighborhood. The same green eyes, though hers were enhanced with makeup that probably cost more than I spent on groceries in a month. The same stubborn chin, though right now only mine was set in a line of determination. A commotion in the hallway interrupted the photo session. Male voices, laughter, the sound of dress shoes on marble floors. The groom's party had arrived for their own pre-ceremony preparations. "That's David," Miranda said, her face lighting up in a way that made her look like the girl I remembered, the one who used to run to the door when her father came home from work. "I should say hello." She stepped into the hallway, her dress trailing behind her like a white river. Through the open door, I could hear David's voice, warm and affectionate, as he told Miranda she looked stunning. The voices of his groomsmen joined in with compliments and good-natured teasing. These were men who'd grown up with David, who'd attended the same schools, belonged to the same clubs, shared the same easy confidence that came from never having to worry about money or acceptance. "Your mother looks lovely too," I heard David say, and I felt a small surge of gratitude toward my future son-in-law. Whatever his faults, whatever pretensions his family might have, he seemed genuinely fond of me. Miranda returned to the bridal suite, her cheeks flushed with happiness. "David says his parents are already here. They're in the club's private dining room, greeting guests as they arrive." His parents. Charles and Victoria Ashworth, pillars of Philadelphia society, people whose names appeared regularly in the social pages of the newspaper. I'd met them exactly 3 times, at Christmas dinner, at Miranda and David's engagement party, and at the rehearsal dinner last night. Each encounter had been polite, cordial, and utterly forgettable from their perspective. I was furniture in the background of their son's life, necessary but not particularly noteworthy. "Should we head down soon?" Jessica asked, checking her watch. "The ceremony starts in an hour." Miranda nodded, but her expression had grown tense again. "Mom, remember what we talked about? Low profile, careful conversation. And if anyone asks about Dad, just say he was in business." That's not technically a lie. He did run his own landscaping company for a few years. He'd run his landscaping company out of our garage, with second-hand equipment and clients who paid in cash. It had been honest work he'd been proud of, but I understood why Miranda wanted to reshape the narrative. In David's world, business meant boardrooms and stock options, not pickup trucks and lawnmowers. The photographer packed up his equipment, while the bridesmaids touched up their makeup and gathered their bouquets. The organized chaos of wedding preparation was winding down, giving way to the ceremonial precision of the actual event. In a few hours, Miranda would be Mrs. David Ashworth III, officially part of a family whose history stretched back to the founding of the Republic, whose name appeared on hospital wings and university buildings. And I would be the mother of the bride, smiling from the front row, keeping my stories to myself, watching my daughter step into a life I'd made possible but would never truly be part of. The bridal party began making their way downstairs to the main level of the country club. I followed at a discreet distance, my low heels clicking against the polished floors. The walls were lined with photographs of past presidents and founding members, men in old-fashioned suits with serious expressions and impressive mustaches. This was a place steeped in tradition, in the kind of history that came from money and power, rather than struggle and survival. The ceremony was to take place in the club's garden, where white chairs arranged in perfect rows faced an altar decorated with white roses and baby's breath. A string quartet played softly while guests took their seats, the women's jewelry catching the afternoon sunlight, the men's conversation a low murmur of business and politics and golf scores. I found my designated seat in the front row, next to David's parents. Victoria Ashworth was already seated, her silver hair perfectly arranged, her navy dress impeccably tailored. She turned as I sat down, offering a smile that was warm enough to be polite, but cool enough to maintain distance. "Eleanor," she said, using my full name in the way people do when they want to sound formal. "How lovely you look. What an exciting day for our families." Our families. I appreciated the plural, even if I suspected it was more courtesy than conviction. Charles Ashworth leaned forward to greet me. "The ceremony looks beautiful. Miranda has excellent taste." She did have excellent taste. Taste I'd helped her develop during years of window shopping and magazine browsing when we couldn't afford the things we admired. But I simply smiled and agreed that the ceremony was lovely, that Miranda had planned everything beautifully, that we were blessed to be here. The string quartet shifted to a more formal piece, signaling that the ceremony was about to begin. David appeared at the altar with his groomsmen, all of them looking like they'd stepped out of a magazine advertisement for expensive watches or luxury cars. He caught my eye and smiled, and I felt that surge of gratitude again. Whatever happened after today, he genuinely loved my daughter, and that was more important than social status or family connections. The bridesmaids began their processional, each of them moving with practiced grace down the white carpet. Jessica caught my eye as she passed and gave me a small, encouraging nod. At least someone remembered that this was supposed to be a celebration, not a performance evaluation. Then the music changed to Wagner's traditional wedding march, and every head turned toward the back of the garden where Miranda appeared on the arm of my brother Michael. He'd flown in from Denver to walk her down the aisle since her father couldn't, and he looked handsome in his rented tuxedo, his usually unruly hair tamed for the occasion. Michael had Robert's easy smile and gentle manner, and seeing him escort Miranda felt like having a piece of my husband present after all. Miranda was radiant as she made her way down the aisle, her dress floating around her like a cloud. She smiled at the guests, at David's family, at her college friends who'd made the trip to be here, but when her eyes found mine, her expression shifted slightly, becoming more guarded, more careful. Even in this moment of joy, she was thinking about impressions, about maintaining the image she'd worked so hard to create. The ceremony itself was beautiful, traditional, everything Miranda had dreamed of since she was a little girl playing dress-up in my bedroom. The minister spoke about love and commitment, about building a future together, about the joining of two families in celebration of the union. David's voice was strong and clear as he recited his vows, while Miranda's responses were soft but confident. They looked perfect together, like they'd been designed to complement each other. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, David's kiss was gentle and respectful, exactly the kind of kiss that would photograph well and not embarrass anyone's grandmother. The guests applauded as the new couple made their way back down the aisle, and I found myself crying despite my best efforts to maintain composure. This was what I'd worked for, what I'd sacrificed for, what had made every double shift and missed meal and sleepless night worthwhile. The receiving line formed on the club's terrace, where guests could congratulate the couple before moving to the cocktail hour. I stood with the immediate family, accepting compliments on how beautiful Miranda looked, how lovely the ceremony had been, how fortunate David was to have found such a wonderful woman. Each comment was genuine, but I could hear the undertone of surprise, the unspoken acknowledgement that Miranda had somehow transcended her origins to land in this rarefied world. "You must be so proud," one guest said, a woman whose diamonds caught the light as she spoke. "Miranda is such a lovely girl, so poised, so accomplished. Where did she get her sense of style?" The question was innocent enough, but it carried assumptions that made my chest tighten. As if style were something that came from breeding rather than observation. As if grace were inherited rather than learned through years of watching and practicing and trying to fit in where you didn't quite belong. "She's always been artistic," I said, which was true. Miranda had spent hours as a child drawing pictures of beautiful dresses and elegant rooms, creating the world she wanted to live in long before she had the means to achieve it. The cocktail hour was held in the club's main ballroom, where servers circulated with champagne and hors d'oeuvre that looked like tiny works of art. I accepted a glass of champagne and found a spot near the windows where I could watch without being too obviously part of the crowd. This was what Miranda had requested after all. Low profile, careful conversation, nothing that might disrupt the carefully orchestrated perfection of the day. From my vantage point, I could see the different groups of guests naturally separating into their social clusters. David's family and friends occupied the center of the room, their conversation punctuated by the kind of laughter that came from shared experiences and similar backgrounds. Miranda's college friends had claimed a corner near the bar, taking photos and reminiscing about their sorority days. A few family members from my side, my sister Janet and her husband, my cousin Robert's old work friends, clustered together like visitors in an art museum, appreciating the surroundings but not quite sure they belonged. Miranda moved through the crowd like she'd been born to this, accepting congratulations and making introductions with the confidence of someone who'd studied the social protocols until they became second nature. She'd always been a quick learner, my daughter, observant and adaptable in ways that had served her well in school and were serving her even better now. David's father approached me during a lull in the conversations, his expression friendly but curious. "Eleanor, David tells me you work in manufacturing. That must be interesting work." Manufacturing. It was a more elegant way to describe factory work, and I appreciated the diplomatic language even as I recognized it for what it was. "I work for Princeton Textiles," I said. "Quality control, mostly. Making sure everything meets standards before it ships out." "Quality control is so important in any industry," he said seriously. "Attention to detail, maintaining standards, understanding the entire process. Those are valuable skills." He was being kind, finding ways to make my job sound more important than it was, and I was grateful for the effort even if we both knew the truth. Quality control at Princeton Textiles meant standing at a conveyor belt for 8 hours a day, checking seams and catching defects before they made it to the warehouse. It was honest work, necessary work, but it wasn't the kind of career that opened doors in Charles Ashworth's world. "Miranda certainly learned attention to detail from somewhere," he continued. David says she's meticulous about everything, from her work presentations to planning this wedding. Those qualities don't come from nowhere. They came from watching me balance checkbooks down to the penny and plan grocery lists that would stretch $1 as far as possible. They came from learning that mistakes had consequences when you couldn't afford to make them, that excellence was the price of admission to any table where you didn't automatically belong. But Charles Ashworth probably didn't need to hear those details. She's always been organized. I agreed. Even as a little girl, she liked everything in its proper place. The cocktail hour continued with its carefully orchestrated mingling, conversations, flowing from weather to travel plans to business ventures. I found myself talking to David's aunt about flower arranging, to his business partner's wife about the challenges of wedding planning, to various guests who were polite and friendly, and clearly wondering how to categorize me in their social filing system. Then the ballroom doors opened for dinner, and guests began moving toward their assigned tables. I'd seen the seating chart earlier, a masterpiece of social engineering that placed compatible personalities together while avoiding potential conflicts. Miranda had agonized over every placement, worrying about who might say what to whom, about mixing different social circles without causing awkwardness. My table was near the front but off to one side, with my sister Janet and her husband Michael, and his wife Sarah, and two couples I didn't recognize who turned out to be David's business associates and their spouses. It was a diplomatic arrangement that kept me close enough to the action to show respect for my position as mother of the bride, but far enough from the head table to avoid any potential embarrassments. The dinner conversation was pleasant enough, covering safe topics like the weather, the beauty of the ceremony, the elegance of the country club. Janet regaled the table with stories about Miranda's childhood achievements, her academic successes, her early signs of ambition and drive. The business associates shared anecdotes about David's professional reputation, his quick thinking in negotiations, his bright future at the firm. I listened and smiled and contributed when appropriate, but part of my attention was focused on the head table where Miranda sat with David and their wedding party. She looked radiant in the candlelight, laughing at something one of the groomsmen had said, her hand resting on David's arm in a gesture of easy intimacy. This was the Miranda she was meant to be, I realized. Not the worried daughter from the bridal suite, but the confident woman who'd found her place in the world. The meal was delicious, each course more elaborate than the last, accompanied by wines that probably cost more per bottle than I made in a day. The servers were attentive without being intrusive, refilling glasses and replacing utensils with the practiced efficiency of people who'd served many events like this one. Everything was perfect, orchestrated down to the smallest detail. Then the toasts began, and I felt my shoulders tense despite my best efforts to remain relaxed. David's father spoke first, welcoming Miranda into the family with words that were both warm and formal. He spoke about David's character, about the importance of choosing a life partner wisely, about the bright future that awaited the young couple. He raised his glass to Miranda, calling her a wonderful addition to their family, and everyone applauded politely. The best man followed with the traditional blend of embarrassing stories and heartfelt sentiment that wedding guests expected. He'd known David since prep school, and his anecdotes painted a picture of privilege and possibility, of summers in exclusive camps and weekends at family estates, of opportunities that had been available from birth rather than earned through struggle. Then it was time for the maid of honor, and Jessica stood with a slight smile playing at the corners of her mouth. She'd known Miranda since they were 18, had been her roommate during college, had watched her transformation from scholarship student to social butterfly to successful businesswoman. I met Miranda on our first day of college, Jessica began, when she showed up at our dorm room with everything she owned packed into 2 suitcases and a determination to make the most of every opportunity Princeton had to offer. 2 suitcases. I remembered helping her pack for college, trying to fit 4 years' worth of dreams into the luggage we could afford. She'd been so careful about what to bring, choosing each item for its versatility and practicality, knowing she wouldn't be coming home for clothes or supplies the way her wealthier classmates might. Miranda worked harder than anyone I knew, Jessica continued. While the rest of us were complaining about our course loads, she was working study hall hours, tutoring other students, and still managing to maintain a 4-point average. She never talked about it like it was a burden, never acted like she deserved praise for doing what needed to be done. She just did it. I could see Miranda's expression from across the room. the slight tightening around her eyes that suggested she wasn't entirely comfortable with this line of storytelling. Jessica was venturing into territory that Miranda preferred to keep private, the realm of necessity rather than choice. But what I admired most about Miranda, Jessica said, raising her glass higher, was how she never forgot where she came from, or the person who made her success possible. She used to tell me about her mother, about a woman who worked double shifts to pay for her daughter's education, who never missed a parent-teacher conference even when she was exhausted, who taught her that dignity comes from how you treat others, not from what others think of you. The room had grown quiet, everyone listening intently now. I could feel dozens of pairs of eyes turning toward me, some curious, some surprised, some beginning to understand that there was more to this story than they'd assumed. Miranda's mother taught her that real class isn't about money or social position, Jessica continued, her voice growing stronger. It's about integrity, about working hard, about lifting others up instead of looking down on them. And if you want to know where Miranda got her grace under pressure, her determination to succeed, her ability to make everyone around her feel valued and appreciated, you only have to look at the woman who raised her. Jessica raised her glass toward me, and suddenly the entire room was looking in my direction, applauding, smiling, acknowledging me in a way that made my throat tight with unexpected emotion. This wasn't the low-profile recognition Miranda had requested. This was something bigger, more honest, more real than anything that had been planned. Miranda was looking at me too, her expression unreadable from across the room. I couldn't tell if she was mortified or moved, embarrassed or proud. But David was smiling broadly, applauding with genuine enthusiasm, and that gave me hope that maybe, just maybe, the truth wasn't as dangerous as my daughter had feared. The applause died down, and Jessica concluded her toast with wishes for the couple's happiness and success. Dinner resumed with dessert and coffee. Conversations flowing around the revelation like water around a stone. Some guests came by my table to compliment Jessica's words, to share their own stories about working mothers and family sacrifices, to acknowledge the reality behind Miranda's polished success. But the evening was far from over, and I could sense something building in the atmosphere, a tension that suggested the careful script Miranda had written for this day was about to be disrupted in ways none of us had anticipated. As if on cue, there was a commotion near the ballroom entrance, voices raised in excitement, people turning to look toward the doors. Miranda's expression shifted from confusion to alarm as she realized something unplanned was happening, something that could threaten the perfect evening she'd orchestrated so carefully. And then the doors opened, and everything changed. The evening truly began 3 weeks earlier, on a Tuesday that started like any other at Peterson Textiles. I'd been at my station since 6 in the morning, running my hands along seams and checking stitching patterns with the kind of automatic precision that comes from 15 years of doing the same job. The conveyor belt hummed its familiar rhythm, and the fluorescent lights cast their harsh glow over rows of workers bent over their tasks. My supervisor, Carol Martinez, approached during the morning break with a clipboard and an expression I'd learned to read over the years. Good news wore a different face than bad news, and this wasn't the face of someone delivering a promotion or a raise. "Eleanor, I need to talk to you about something," she said, gesturing toward the break room where we could have privacy. "There's been some restructuring announced by corporate. Budget cuts, efficiency improvements, the usual corporate speak." I poured coffee from the machine that had been broken for 3 months and fixed with duct tape and determination. The coffee tasted like it had been filtered through sawdust, but it was hot, and it was free, which made it perfect for someone counting every penny until the next paycheck. "How bad is it?" I asked, though I already knew. Carol had that look people get when they're about to deliver news that will change your life in ways you didn't choose and can't control. Layoffs start next month. 15 positions eliminated, mostly in quality control and finishing. The company's moving more operations overseas, and they're bringing in automated systems to replace manual inspection. 15 positions. In a department of 22 people. That meant most of us would be looking for new jobs by Christmas. I thought about Miranda's wedding expenses, about the contributions I'd promised to make, about the mortgage payment that was already stretching my budget beyond its limits. "Do we know who?" I asked, though again, I already knew. Last hired, first fired was the rule in manufacturing, but in quality control, it was also oldest hired, first retired. At 58, I was among the senior workers, the ones whose salaries had crept up over the years, the ones whose health insurance costs more than the company wanted to pay. The list isn't final yet. HR is still working through the details, reviewing performance records, calculating severance packages. But Eleanor, Carol's voice softened. You should probably start looking. Just in case. Start looking. As if jobs for 58-year-old factory workers were posted on every street corner, as if my 15 years of experience at Peterson would translate seamlessly to some other opportunity. The manufacturing sector had been shrinking for decades, companies moving operations to countries where labor was cheaper and regulations were more flexible. Finding comparable work at my age would be like finding a needle in a haystack, assuming the haystack hadn't already been shipped overseas. I finished my coffee and returned to my station, but the rhythm felt different now. Each piece that passed under my hands might be part of my final weeks at Peterson. Each paycheck might be among the last I'd earn at a salary that covered my basic expenses. The future I'd been planning, the modest retirement I'd been saving for, the financial stability that let me sleep at night, all of it had become uncertain in the space of a 10-minute conversation. That evening I sat at my kitchen table, with bills spread across the surface like pieces of a puzzle I couldn't solve. The wedding expenses were mounting faster than I'd anticipated. The mother of the bride dress, the contribution to the reception costs, the hotel room for out-of-town family members, the gift I'd wanted to give Miranda and David to start their new life together. Add to that my regular monthly expenses, the mortgage payment that still had 12 years left on it, the car payment on the reliable Honda that got me to work every day, and the numbers painted a picture I didn't want to see. My phone rang, and Miranda's name appeared on the screen. She called every Tuesday evening, a routine we'd established after her father died, a way of staying connected despite the distance between Philadelphia and the suburban apartment where I'd moved after selling the family house. Hi, Mom. How was your day? The question was innocent, automatic, the kind of small talk that fills the space between people who love each other but don't always know what to say. Under normal circumstances, I would have given the standard response. Fine, busy, nothing special. But these weren't normal circumstances, and the weight of the morning's news made honesty feel both necessary and dangerous. Actually, there might be some dire changes at work. Budget cuts, restructuring, that sort of thing. Oh no, is your job safe? The concern in her voice was genuine, but it was also distant, the way people worry about problems that won't directly affect their own lives. Miranda had been successful for long enough now that financial insecurity was more of an abstract concept than a lived reality. She knew I worked hard, knew money had always been tight, but she didn't know the daily calculations, the constant juggling of priorities that defined my relationship with survival. I don't know yet. We'll see how it plays out. Well, if something happens, we can figure it out. Maybe this would be a good time to think about retirement anyway. You've been working at that place for so long, and the hours are so demanding. Maybe it's time to slow down, enjoy life a little. Retirement. As if I had a pension plan and a 401k that would support me through my golden years. As if 15 years at Peterson Textiles had left me financially prepared to stop working. Miranda meant well, but her suggestions came from a world where retirement was a choice rather than a catastrophe, where slowing down didn't mean choosing between medication and meals. Maybe, I said, because explaining the reality would only worry her, and she had enough on her mind with wedding preparations and her demanding job at the consulting firm. How are things going with the planning? The conversation shifted to safer territory. Flowers and music and seating arrangements, the thousands of decisions that go into creating a perfect wedding day. Miranda's enthusiasm was infectious, her attention to detail impressive, her vision for the event clearly defined. She'd been planning this wedding since she was 6 years old, and every choice reflected years of dreaming and hoping and working toward this moment. David's parents have been so generous, she said. They're covering the country club fees and the catering, and his mother insists on paying for the flowers. I feel like I should contribute more, but they keep saying it's their pleasure, that they're just happy to welcome me into the family. The Ashworth family's generosity was both a blessing and a reminder of the distance between their world and mine. They could cover wedding expenses that represented months of my salary without thinking twice, could offer gestures of welcome that cost more than I made in a year. Their kindness was real, but it was also casual, the way people are generous when generosity doesn't require sacrifice. That's wonderful, honey. It sounds like they really care about you. They do, and that means everything to me. David says his mother is already talking about grandchildren, about family traditions she wants to share. It's like having a whole new family, you know? People who can open doors, make connections, help us build the kind of life we want. The kind of life we want. I heard the plural, but I understood that it referred to Miranda and David, not to Miranda and me. The life they were building together was in David's world, among David's people, with David's family's resources and connections and expectations. It was exactly what I'd worked for, exactly what I'd wanted for her, and exactly what would leave me more alone than I'd ever been. After we hung up, I returned to the bills on my kitchen table, but the numbers looked even more daunting now. If I lost my job at Princeton, if I couldn't find comparable work quickly, if the wedding expenses continued to mount, I'd be facing choices I wasn't prepared to make. The mortgage payment alone was more than unemployment benefits would cover, even if I qualified for them. The health insurance I carried through Princeton was expensive but necessary, and finding individual coverage at my age would be financially devastating. I thought about calling Miranda back, about explaining the situation more clearly, about asking if we could scale back my contributions to the wedding. But I could still hear the excitement in her voice when she talked about the country club and the flowers and the perfect day she'd been planning for so long. How could I tell her that her perfect day might bankrupt the person who'd made it possible? Instead, I did what I'd always done when faced with problems that seemed too big to solve. I broke them down into smaller pieces, into actions I could take, into steps that would move me forward, even if I couldn't see the destination. I started with the most immediate concern, which was finding out exactly what my situation would be if Pedersen followed through with the layoffs. The next morning, I arrived at work early and went straight to the HR office. Sandra Williams had been handling personnel issues at Princeton for 8 years, and she'd always been straight with me about policy changes and company decisions. If anyone would give me honest answers about my prospects, it would be Sandra. Eleanor, I was hoping you'd come in. I've been reviewing the files, and I wanted to talk to you about your options. She gestured to a chair across from her desk, the same chair where I'd filled out paperwork for Miranda's college tuition assistance, where I'd requested time off for her father's funeral, where I'd negotiated payment plans for medical bills when my insurance coverage fell short. How bad is it? I asked, because Sandra's expression suggested we weren't going to be discussing good news. Your position is on the list for elimination. The automated systems they're installing will handle most of the quality control functions, and the remaining positions will require technical training that the company isn't prepared to provide. She opened a folder and pulled out several documents. However, you do have some options. Options. In my experience, when HR representatives used that word, it usually meant choices between different types of bad news. There's a severance package available, 4 weeks of pay, plus accumulated vacation time. You'd also be eligible for COBRA continuation of your health insurance, though you'd be responsible for the full premium. She handed me a document that outlined the terms. There's also early retirement, if you're interested. You wouldn't be eligible for full benefits until you're 62, but there are some transitional programs that might help. 4 weeks of severance pay wouldn't even cover 1 month's mortgage payment. COBRA insurance would cost more than I'd been paying through the company plan, eating up most of the severance before I found new employment. Early retirement sounded appealing until I considered the financial reality of trying to survive on reduced benefits for the next 4 years. When would this take effect? The official notice goes out next week, with termination dates starting December 1st. That gives people about 6 weeks to make arrangements, look for other work, explore their options. December 1st. 3 weeks after Miranda's wedding, just in time for Christmas, perfectly timed to destroy any hope of financial stability through the holidays. The irony was almost artistic in its cruelty. I took the severance paperwork and promised to review it carefully, but my mind was already racing ahead to more immediate concerns. 6 weeks to find new employment in a shrinking job market. 6 weeks to figure out how to maintain my standard of living on whatever work I could find. 6 weeks to prepare for a future that looked increasingly uncertain. That afternoon, I called my sister Janet, the only person in my life who understood the economics of working-class survival because she'd been living it too. Janet worked as a secretary at a law firm, a job that paid modestly but offered decent benefits and relative security. She'd been married to Tom for 30 years, and together they'd managed to build the kind of stable, middle-class life that always seemed just out of my reach. "How serious is this?" she asked after I'd explained the situation at Peterson. "Serious enough that I need to start planning for unemployment. The severance won't last long, and finding another job at my age isn't going to be easy." "What about Miranda? Can she help out while you're looking?" It was a reasonable question from someone who didn't understand the dynamics of Miranda's new life. Janet knew Miranda would judge her worthiness based on presentations and impressions rather than character and achievement. A day that required editing our family history, sanitizing our struggles, presenting a version of ourselves that would pass inspection by people who'd never been inspected by anyone. "I understand," I said, and I did understand. I understood that Miranda was protecting something precious, that David's world came with rules and expectations that were foreign to me but crucial to her future. I understood that her success depended on navigating social protocols I'd never learned, on maintaining relationships with people whose approval could open doors or close them forever. But I also understood something else, something that crystallized as I stood in the checkout line of a discount store, holding a $40 dress and a phone call that asked me to pretend our life together had been something other than what it was. I understood that the distance between Miranda's world and mine was growing wider every day, and that her wedding would mark not just the beginning of her marriage, but the end of our shared story. After the call ended, I sat in my car in the parking lot for a long time, watching other shoppers load their purchases into vehicles that had seen better years. People who looked like they understood the mathematics of survival, who knew the weight of choosing between wants and needs. These were my people, the ones who shopped at discount stores and clipped coupons and calculated the cost of everything because they had to. But they weren't Miranda's people anymore, and maybe that was exactly what I'd been working toward all along. The next week passed in a blur of wedding preparations and job applications, of conversations with Miranda about flowers and music that carefully avoided any mention of my employment situation. I submitted resumes to manufacturing companies throughout the region, most of which responded with polite rejections or deafening silence. The few interviews I managed to arrange made it clear that my age and experience level made me an expensive candidate for positions that could be filled by younger workers at lower salaries. On Thursday evening, Miranda called with news that made my stomach drop. "Mom, David's parents want to take us to dinner tomorrow night. Just the four of us, kind of a final pre-wedding celebration. They've made reservations at this amazing restaurant downtown, and they want to get to know me better before the ceremony." Meeting the parents. The final audition. The last chance for David's family to evaluate their son's choice before it became official and irreversible. Miranda's nervousness was evident in her voice, the way it had been before college interviews and job presentations, when everything depended on making the right impression at exactly the right moment. "That sounds wonderful, honey. They obviously care about you very much." "I hope so. I mean, they've been nothing but kind, but sometimes I feel like they're still trying to figure out if I belong in their world. Like they're waiting to see if I'll say something wrong or reveal something about my background that makes them uncomfortable." Her background. Our background. The life we'd built together through 15 years of single parenthood. Of factory shifts and homework help and birthday parties that cost more than we could afford but less than she deserved. The background that had taught her resilience and determination and the value of hard work, but that also marked her as different from people who'd never had to learn those lessons. "You belong anywhere you want to belong," I said. "You've earned your place in David's world through your own achievements, your own character. Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise." But even as I said the words, I knew they weren't entirely true. Miranda's achievements were real. Her character was strong, but belonging in David's world required more than personal merit. It required the right education, the right connections, the right story about where you came from and how you got where you were. It required passing. Successful, knew she'd married well, but she didn't grasp the social complexities that would make financial assistance from her daughter both awkward and potentially damaging to the relationships Miranda was building. She's got her own life now, her own responsibilities. I don't want to burden her with my problems. Eleanor, she's your daughter. Family helps family when times get tough. Family helps family. It was a principle that had guided my relationship with Miranda for 28 years. The reason I'd worked double shifts and sacrificed my own comfort to give her opportunities I'd never had. But the help had always flowed in one direction, from mother to daughter, from older generation to younger. The idea of reversing that flow, of asking Miranda to support me, felt like admitting failure in ways I wasn't ready to confront. I'll figure something out, I said, because that's what I'd always done, what single mothers and factory workers and people without safety nets learn to do. Figure something out. Make it work. Survive. Until the next crisis demanded the same resourcefulness. That weekend, I drove to the discount store, where I'd bought Miranda's back-to-school clothes throughout her childhood, looking for a dress suitable for a mother of the bride at a country club wedding. The selection was limited, but I found a navy blue dress with a modest neckline and a flattering cut that looked appropriate for the occasion. At $40, it was more than I usually spent on clothing, but it was also an investment in Miranda's happiness, in maintaining the appearance of stability and success that her new family expected. While I was paying for the dress, my phone rang. Miranda's name on the screen, calling earlier than usual, her voice carrying a tension I recognized from her college years, when deadlines and expectations created more stress than any 20-year-old should have to manage. "Mom, I need to ask you about something, and I need you to promise me you'll understand where I'm coming from." The words sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the air conditioning in the discount store. Miranda only used that tone when she was about to say something she knew would hurt me, when she was preparing to prioritize other people's comfort over our relationship. "Of course, honey. What's on your mind?" "It's about the wedding reception. David's family has very specific expectations about how these events should go, and I need to make sure everything runs smoothly. His father is a federal judge, his mother sits on all these charity boards, and there will be people there whose opinions could really affect David's career. Expectations and opinions and effects on David's career. The language of a world where appearances mattered more than authenticity, where the wrong impression could have consequences that rippled through professional and social networks for years. I understand. What do you need me to do?" "I need you to be careful about what you say during the reception. About our family history. About Dad's problems. About your work situation. I know it sounds harsh, but these people don't understand our background, and I don't want anything to overshadow the celebration. Be careful. Don't mention Dad's problems. Don't talk about work. Don't let anyone see where we really came from, or how we'd really survived. Create a version of our story that would be palatable to people who'd never had to worry about mortgage payments or layoffs or choosing between medicine and groceries." "What kind of things should I avoid?" I asked, though I was beginning to understand the full scope of what Miranda was requesting. "Just keep things general, you know? If anyone asks about Dad, just say he was in business. If they ask about your work, maybe mention manufacturing, but not the specifics. And if the conversation turns to money or family finances, just change the subject. I know it's a lot to ask, but this day is so important to me, and I want everything to be perfect. Perfect. A day that would launch Miranda into her new life, surrounded by people who, employees. It would mean starting over in some ways, learning new skills, probably taking a pay cut initially, but it might provide better long-term prospects than trying to find another manufacturing job. Retraining programs. Starting over at 58, learning new skills, proving my worth to employers who would probably prefer younger candidates anyway. It sounded exhausting and humiliating and uncertain. It also sounded like the only realistic path forward, the only way to avoid the downward spiral that had trapped so many older workers in declining industries. What kind of businesses? What kind of skills? Administrative support, customer service, some basic computer training. The goal is to prepare people for service sector jobs, Office environments where experience and reliability matter more than physical capacity or technical expertise. Service sector jobs. Office environments. A complete departure from the manufacturing world I'd known for 15 years. Admission that my skills and experience were no longer valuable in the economy that was emerging. But it was also an opportunity, a chance to reinvent myself before circumstances forced me to accept whatever work I could find. I took the retraining information and promised to consider it carefully. The program would start in January, assuming I qualified, and assuming spaces were available. It would mean 3 months of unpaid training followed by a 6-month internship at reduced wages. A significant financial sacrifice for uncertain prospects. But it would also mean hope. A path forward that didn't depend on finding an employer willing to take a chance on an older worker in a dying industry. Tuesday morning, the day before Miranda's wedding, I woke up with a strange sense of clarity about what the next 24 hours would bring. Miranda had asked me to be careful, to present an edited version of our family story, to help her maintain the image she'd worked so hard to create. I'd agreed because I loved her, because I wanted her to be happy, because protecting her dreams seemed more important than defending my own dignity. But clarity and agreement were different things, and as I prepared for my role as mother of the bride, I realized I had choices to make about how to honor both Miranda's request and my own integrity. The truth about our family was complicated, full of struggle and resilience and love that had survived circumstances that would have destroyed weaker bonds. It was a story worth telling, even if it wasn't the story Miranda wanted her new family to hear. That afternoon, as I pressed my $40 dress and prepared for the rehearsal dinner, I thought about Jessica's words from college, about dignity coming from how you treat others, rather than from what others think of you. Miranda had learned that lesson from me, along with so many others. During the years we'd navigated single parenthood and financial uncertainty together. Perhaps it was time for me to remind her that some lessons are worth remembering, even when remembering them is inconvenient. The rehearsal dinner was held at a private dining room in downtown Philadelphia, an elegant space with crystal chandeliers and waiters, who moved with the practiced efficiency of people accustomed to serving wealthy clientele. The guest list was small and carefully curated: immediate family, the wedding party, and a few close friends who'd made the trip from out of town. I arrived precisely on time, wearing the navy dress and the modest jewelry I'd inherited from my mother, carrying myself with the dignity that came from knowing I'd earned my place at that table through years of sacrifice and love. Miranda looked radiant in a cocktail dress that probably cost more than my car payment, her happiness evident in every gesture and expression. David was attentive and charming, clearly devoted to his bride and excited about their future together. Charles and Victoria Ashworth were gracious hosts, welcoming everyone with genuine warmth and enthusiasm for the upcoming ceremony. Charles shook my hand firmly and thanked me for raising such a remarkable inspections that had nothing to do with who you really were and everything to do with how well you could perform the role they expected. I know you're right. It's just that so much is riding on this, you know? David's career, our future together, the life we're trying to build. I don't want to mess it up by saying something stupid or revealing too much about our situation. Our situation. The phrase made it sound like we were refugees from some disaster, rather than people who'd worked hard and built a decent life within our means. But I understood what she meant, understood that poverty was relative, and that what seemed like survival to us might seem like failure to people who'd never had to survive anything. Friday night, while Miranda was having dinner with David's parents, I sat in my apartment reviewing job listings and calculating how long my savings would last if I couldn't find employment quickly. The math was depressing, but not hopeless. I could survive for about 6 months on unemployment benefits and savings combined. Longer if I was willing to make serious cuts to my lifestyle. The mortgage would be the biggest challenge, but I might be able to negotiate a temporary payment reduction if I explained my situation to the bank. My phone rang at 9:30, Miranda calling from the restaurant bathroom, her voice tight with stress. "Mom, this isn't going well." David's father has been asking all these questions about our family, about Dad's work, about where I went to school before college. I've been trying to keep things vague, but he's very persistent. Persistent. The word suggested someone conducting an investigation rather than making conversation. Someone looking for specific information that would help them categorize Miranda in their social filing system. What kind of questions? About Dad's business, about what kind of company he owned, about why I was so focused on getting scholarships for college. And David's mother keeps asking about you, about your work, about our family traditions. I think they're trying to figure out if we're the kind of people who belong at their country club. The kind of people who belong. As if belonging were determined by bloodlines and bank accounts, rather than character and contribution. As if the years Miranda had spent excelling academically and professionally somehow counted less than the circumstances of her birth. Just be honest, honey. Tell them about Dad's landscaping business, about how hard he worked to build something from nothing. Tell them about the values we taught you, about the work ethic that got you where you are. If they're good people, they'll respect that. But what if they're not? What if they decide I'm not suitable for their son? What if this ruins everything we've worked for? The fear in her voice was real, the terror of someone who'd climbed very high and was afraid of falling. Miranda had invested everything in building her new life, had sacrificed connections to her old world in order to fit into her new one. The idea that it might all be taken away by a dinner conversation was crushing her with its unfairness. Then they're not worthy of you, I said. And David isn't worthy of you either if he won't stand up for the woman he supposedly loves. But we both knew it wasn't that simple. David loved Miranda, but he also lived in a world where family approval mattered, where social acceptance was a form of currency, where the wrong associations could damage career prospects and social standing for generations. He would have to choose between his family's expectations and his wife's background, and that kind of choice had destroyed many marriages before they'd even really begun. Miranda returned to the dinner, and I didn't hear from her again until Saturday morning. Her voice was exhausted, but relieved when she called, like someone who'd survived a difficult exam. It went better after I relaxed and just told them the truth. Well, most of the truth. I explained that Dad had his own business, that you worked in manufacturing, that we weren't wealthy but we were hardworking and honest. David's mother seemed impressed that you managed to raise me alone while working full-time. She said it showed character. Character. It was something, at least. A recognition that single parenthood and factory work required qualities that wealthy people could respect, even if they'd never had to develop those qualities themselves. And David's father? He was more reserved, but he told David later that he thought I handled their questions well, that I seemed grounded and practical. David says his father respects people who've had to work for what they have, who understand the value of money and effort. Respects people who've had to work. The phrase suggested that Charles Ashworth understood the difference between inherited wealth and earned success, that he valued Miranda's achievements more because of the obstacles she'd overcome to reach them. It was encouraging, but it was also a reminder that Miranda's acceptance into his family would always be conditional, always subject to evaluations and judgments that David would never have to face. I'm glad it went well. You deserve their respect and acceptance. There's just one more thing, Mom. They're expecting to meet you properly at the wedding, to have real conversations with you about our family and our history. David's father specifically asked if he'd have a chance to talk with you about Dad, about the kind of man he was. I think he wants to understand where I come from, what shaped me into the person David fell in love with. Where I come from. What shaped me. The real story of our family. Not the edited version Miranda had been presenting to protect their sensibilities, but the truth about Robert's alcoholism and recovery, about factory shifts and financial struggles, about the choices we'd made and the prices we'd paid to give her opportunities we'd never had. What did you tell him? I told him you'd be happy to talk with him, that you have wonderful stories about Dad and about our family. But Mom, please be careful about how much you share. Some of the details about Dad's drinking, about the really hard times we had, maybe those don't need to be part of the conversation. Just focus on the positive things, the recovery, the good years, the lessons he taught me. Focus on the positive. Edit out the struggle. Present a version of our story that would be comfortable for people who'd never had to live it. It was the same request she'd been making for weeks. The same plea to help her maintain the careful image she'd constructed of her background and family history. I understand, I said, though understanding was becoming more complicated with each conversation. I understood that Miranda was trying to protect something precious, but I was also beginning to understand that the thing she was protecting required betraying something equally precious. the truth about who we were and what we'd survived together. That afternoon, I made a decision that surprised me with its clarity. I called Sandra Williams at Peterson Textiles and scheduled a meeting to discuss my severance package in detail. If I was going to lose my job, I wanted to understand exactly what my options were, what resources I'd have available, what kind of timeline I was working with. Knowledge was power, even when the knowledge was painful, and I needed to stop hoping for rescue and start planning for survival. The meeting was scheduled for Monday morning, 2 days before Miranda's wedding. Sandra was thorough and professional, explaining every aspect of the severance agreement, the COBRA insurance continuation, the early retirement option that would reduce my benefits but provide some income. The numbers were daunting but not impossible. I would have to make significant changes to my lifestyle, probably sell the house and find cheaper housing, definitely eliminate most of the small luxuries I'd worked years to afford. There is one other option we haven't discussed, Sandra said as we were finishing up. The company is offering retraining programs for displaced workers, paid internships with local businesses that are looking for experienced daughter. Victoria complimented my dress and asked about my preparations for the wedding, the kind of small talk that smooths social interactions without revealing much about anyone involved. During dinner, the conversation flowed easily among topics that were safe and pleasant. The beauty of the country club, the perfect weather forecast for tomorrow, the honeymoon plans that would take Miranda and David to Europe for 2 weeks. I participated when appropriate, offering comments and observations that contributed to the general atmosphere of celebration without drawing undue attention to myself. Then Charles Ashworth asked the question I'd been expecting and dreading. "Eleanor, Miranda has told us a little about her father, about his business background. I'd love to hear more about him, about the kind of man who raised such an exceptional daughter." The table grew quiet, everyone's attention focused on me, with the intensity that comes when people sense they're about to learn something significant. Miranda's expression was carefully neutral, but I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she held her breath while waiting for my response. I looked around the table at faces that were curious and expectant, people who wanted to understand the story behind Miranda's success, who were prepared to judge our family based on how well I could perform the role of grieving widow with appropriately sanitized memories. Then I looked at Miranda, at the daughter who'd asked me to edit our history to protect her future, who trusted me to love her enough to sacrifice truth for her happiness. And in that moment I realized that the most loving thing I could do was refuse to sacrifice anything at all. "Robert was a complicated man," I began, my voice steady and clear. "He was an alcoholic who struggled with his demons for most of Miranda's childhood. He was also the most devoted father I've ever known, a man who attended every school play and parent-teacher conference even when he was barely functional in other areas of his life." The silence that followed my words was absolute, the kind of quiet that comes when someone has said something that changes everything. Miranda's face went white, her carefully maintained composure cracking like ice under pressure. David reached for her hand, his expression shifting from confusion to concern, as he realized this wasn't the story he'd expected to hear. But I wasn't finished. Truth, once started, demands completion, and I'd spent too many years editing our story to protect other people's comfort. "He got sober when Miranda was 14, I continued, and he stayed sober for the last 8 years of his life. He built a landscaping business from nothing, working 16-hour days to prove to himself and to us that he could be the husband and father we deserved. He taught Miranda that redemption is possible, that people can change, that mistakes don't have to define you if you're willing to do the work to overcome them." Charles Ashworth's expression was unreadable, but he was listening intently, processing information that was clearly different from what he'd expected. Victoria had set down her wine glass, her attention focused completely on my words. "The business was small," I said, "but it was honest work, and Robert was proud of what he'd built. He employed 3 other men, all of them recovering addicts like himself, and he treated them with the kind of respect and patience he'd wished someone had shown him during his darkest years. He taught Miranda that success isn't measured by the size of your bank account but by the difference you make in other people's lives." Miranda was crying now, tears streaming down her cheeks in a way that would require serious makeup repair before the wedding tomorrow. But they weren't tears of embarrassment or anger. They were tears of recognition, of remembering the father she'd loved despite his flaws, the man who'd shaped her character in ways that no amount of money or social status could replicate. When he died, I concluded the church was full of people whose lives he'd touched. Former employees, recovering addicts he'd mentored, neighbors whose yards he'd maintained for free when they couldn't afford to pay. Miranda learned from him that integrity matters more than image, that helping others is more important than helping yourself, that the measure of a life isn't what you accumulate but what you give away. The silence stretched for several long moments before Charles Ashworth spoke. "Thank you for sharing that with us, Eleanor. Robert sounds like a man I would have been honored to know." Victoria nodded, her eyes bright with unshed tears. What a gift he gave Miranda, to show her that people can overcome their struggles, that families can heal, that love is stronger than weakness. No wonder she's such a remarkable woman. The conversation that followed was different from what had come before, deeper and more honest, focused on values and character rather than appearances and expectations. Miranda gradually regained her composure, joining the discussion with stories about her father's later years, about the lessons he'd taught her, about the man he'd become, rather than the man he'd been. When the evening ended, Miranda walked me to my car, her expression thoughtful and conflicted. "Mom, I don't know whether to thank you or be furious with you," she said. "That wasn't what we agreed on. That wasn't careful or edited or safe." "No," I agreed. "It was the truth." The doors opened and I watched 3 figures enter the ballroom. My breath caught as I recognized the first. Robert Martinez, my former supervisor at Peterson Textiles, dressed in his best suit. Behind him walked Dr. Samuel Hayes, the addiction counselor who'd helped Robert through his recovery years ago. The third figure made Miranda gasp audibly. It was Marcus Thompson, Robert's former employee, the young man my late husband had mentored through his own battle with addiction. Marcus now ran a successful landscaping business across 3 counties, employing dozens of people and specializing in helping other recovering addicts find steady work. He'd driven 4 hours to be here. "Mrs. Coleman," Marcus said, approaching our table with quiet dignity, "I couldn't miss Miranda's wedding. Your husband saved my life, and I wanted to honor that." Miranda stared, recognition dawning across her face. Marcus had been just 18 when her father hired him, fresh out of rehab, and desperate for someone to believe in him. Robert had seen potential where others saw only problems. Charles Ashworth stood slowly, his judicial instincts clearly engaged. "And you are?" "Marcus Thompson. I worked for Robert Coleman for 6 years. He taught me everything about business, about integrity, about second chances." Marcus turned to Miranda. "Your father used to show me your report cards. Talk about how proud he was of your achievements. He said you were going to change the world." Dr. Hayes stepped forward, his presence commanding immediate attention. "I'm here because Robert Coleman was one of the most courageous men I ever worked with. His recovery wasn't just personal, it rippled outward, affecting everyone he touched." The ballroom had grown completely silent, every guest straining to hear this unexpected testimony. Miranda's carefully constructed narrative was crumbling, replaced by something far more powerful, the truth about the man who'd shaped her character. "Your husband," Dr. Hayes continued, addressing me directly, "could have stayed quietly sober, kept his head down, avoided difficult situations. Instead, he chose to use his experience to help others. The landscaping business was just the beginning. He volunteered at treatment centers, sponsored dozens of men through recovery, created a foundation that still helps families affected by addiction." Victoria Ashworth had tears in her eyes. "Eleanor, why didn't you tell us about this?" "Because Miranda had asked me not to. Because we'd edited our story to make it palatable for people who'd never struggled. Because we'd forgotten that redemption stories are more powerful than perfect ones." Robert Martinez spoke next, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd managed factory floors and difficult personalities for 30 years. "Mrs. Coleman, I've come to offer you a position. Peterson is restructuring, but I'm starting my own quality control consulting firm. I need someone with your experience, your integrity, your attention to detail." The irony was breathtaking. Here, at my daughter's wedding, surrounded by people who judged our worth based on sanitized stories, I was being offered professional recognition by someone who knew exactly who I was and what I'd contributed. Miranda stood slowly, her wedding dress rustling in the absolute silence of the ballroom. She walked to Marcus, her childhood memories clearly flooding back. Summers when he'd helped her father with yard work, teaching her to identify different plants, sharing stories about overcoming mistakes. "Marcus," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "you came. I promised your dad I'd dance with you at your wedding," he replied simply. He made me promise the last time I saw him. The revelation hit Miranda like a physical blow. Her father had been planning for this day even while dying, making arrangements for people who mattered to be present, ensuring his values would be represented even in his absence. David approached his new wife, his expression mixing confusion with growing understanding. "Miranda, who are these people? Really?" "They're my father's legacy," she said, finding her voice again. "They're the proof that the man I was ashamed to talk about was actually someone extraordinary." Charles Ashworth cleared his throat, his judicial demeanor giving way to something more human. "Mr. Thompson, Dr. Hayes, Mr. Martinez, would you please join us? It seems we have much to learn about the man who raised my new daughter-in-law." The next hour transformed everything. Marcus shared stories about Robert's mentorship, about the business philosophy that put people before profit, about the quiet acts of generosity that had changed lives. Dr. Hayes spoke about addiction recovery as a form of heroism, about the courage required to rebuild a life from ruins, about the ripple effects of one man's determination to help others avoid his mistakes. Robert Martinez detailed my contributions at Peterson, my reliability during 15 years of service, my reputation for fairness and competence that had made me his first choice for his new venture. Miranda listened with growing wonder, realizing she'd been ashamed of a story that was actually heroic. Her father hadn't just overcome addiction, he'd transformed his struggle into a mission of service. Her mother hadn't just worked in a factory, she'd excelled in a demanding field that required precision and integrity. "I've been such a fool," Miranda whispered to me during a quiet moment. "I was so worried about what people would think that I forgot to be proud of where I came from." The evening's revelations changed the entire dynamic of the reception. Guests who'd previously engaged in polite small talk now asked genuine questions about recovery, about manufacturing, about the challenges facing working-class families. The conversation had substance, addressing real issues instead of safe pleasantries. Charles Ashworth found himself deep in discussion with Dr. Hayes about addiction treatment programs, sharing his experience with drug court initiatives. Victoria engaged Robert Martinez in conversation about workforce development, her charity board experience suddenly relevant to practical problems. David pulled me aside near the end of the evening. "Mrs. Coleman, I owe you an apology. Miranda told me some of your story, but I never understood the full picture. Your husband sounds like a remarkable man, and you're clearly an exceptional woman. I'm honored to be part of your family." The wedding that had begun with careful image management ended with authentic connection. Miranda danced with Marcus, fulfilling her father's final wish, while I accepted Robert Martinez's job offer, securing my financial future in ways I'd never imagined. Later, as the evening wound down and guests began departing, Miranda found me on the country club's terrace. The moon reflected off the lake in the distance, peaceful and eternal. "Mom, I'm sorry. I was so worried about fitting in that I forgot the most important lesson Dad taught me, that authenticity is more valuable than acceptance. You were protecting your future, honey. I understand that. But I was wrong. These people," she gestured toward the ballroom where David's parents were still talking with Marcus and Dr. Hayes, "they respect Dad's story more than they ever would have respected a sanitized version. They respect you more for being honest about our struggles than they would have for pretending we didn't have any." The truth had indeed set us free. Miranda's marriage was stronger because it was built on honesty rather than deception. My career prospects had improved because someone valued my actual skills rather than a fictional resume. Our family story had gained power by including its difficult chapters rather than editing them out. Your father would be proud, I told her. Not of the perfect wedding or the impressive guest list, but of the woman you've become and the choices you're making now. Miranda hugged me tight, her wedding dress a cloud of silk and dreams around us both. I love you, Mom. Thank you for not letting me forget who we really are. The stars shone down on a wedding that had become something neither of us had planned, but both of us had needed. Truth had triumphed over image, authenticity over acceptability, and love over fear. Sometimes the best gifts come wrapped in unexpected packages, delivered by people who remember promises made to the dying, who value character over credentials, who understand that the most beautiful stories often begin with the words, "Once upon a time, there was a family that survived." Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.